The candle flame wavered against the cheap frosting on my birthday cake. One solitary light for 32 years of existence. I stared at it mesmerized by how the tiny flame danced and struggled, much like I had been doing my entire life. The studio apartment around me held the stifling silence of loneliness, broken only by the distant honking of taxis on Chicago streets below. My name is Rebecca Morgan, and tonight should have been a celebration. Instead, the phone call from Eleanor Simmons, our family lawyer, had turned this birthday into the final punctuation mark on a chapter of loss. My parents, Thomas and Catherine Morgan, were truly gone forever. The reading of the will would happen tomorrow morning. The cake sat untouched as I stared out my window at the Chicago skyline. The glittering lights of skyscrapers mocked my darkness. I had spent the last 3 weeks trying to build my graphic design startup while processing the shocking loss of both parents in a car accident. Each day brought another client rejection, another unanswered email, another reminder that my dreams were slipping through my fingers like fine sand. I closed my eyes, remembering the last conversation with my mother. Her voice had been distant, preoccupied. "Rebecca, we need to discuss some family matters when we return from the trip." Whatever those matters were, they died with her on that rainy highway. Sleep evaded me that night. I tossed between tangled sheets, haunted by memories and worries about tomorrow. The morning light eventually crept through my blinds, finding me exhausted, but dressed in my most professional black dress and low heels. I applied concealer to the dark circles under my eyes, trying to mask my grief and exhaustion. The Simmons Law Office occupied the 20th floor of a glass and steel tower in downtown Chicago. The receptionist nodded sympathetically as I gave my name, ushering me toward a polished conference room. The space felt too large, too cold, with abstract paintings that seemed to float like expensive ghosts on the walls. The door opened, and my sister Vanessa walked in. At 28, she commanded attention without effort. Her camel-colored designer coat fit perfectly around her slender frame. Her dark hair fell in expensive waves, and her makeup was flawless despite the circumstances. She was everything I was not: confident, successful, the pride of our parents. As the marketing director for a prominent Chicago firm, her life was a carefully curated social media success story. "Rebecca," she said, giving me a brief hug that felt more like a formality than comfort. "You look tired." Before I could respond, the door opened again. James Mitchell walked in, his tailored suit impeccable as always. My heart contracted painfully at the sight of my fiancé. Even in grief, his presence filled the room with a controlled, confident energy that had first attracted me to him. His career in investment banking had always been his priority, but I had convinced myself that his ambition would eventually include room for our shared future. "Are you okay?" he whispered as he sat beside me, his hand briefly touching mine in a gesture so formal it made my skin prickle with unease. Eleanor Simmons entered last, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her thin glasses perched precisely on her nose. She placed a stack of files bound in cream-colored folders on the table, embossed with the Morgan family name. "I'm sorry we meet under these circumstances," she began, her voice steady and practiced. "We will now proceed with the reading of the will." The weight of finality pressed against my chest as she opened the file. The legal language flowed like a distant river, words blurring together until certain phrases caught and held like debris against rocks. The residential property located in Lake Forest, Illinois, appraised at $850,000, along with the investment portfolio valued at approximately $300,000, is hereby transferred to Miss Vanessa Morgan. A small, satisfied sound escaped Vanessa's lips. Not quite surprise, more like confirmation. She glanced at me, the corner of her mouth lifting slightly. "The trees in Lake Forest are beautiful in autumn, perfect for my lifestyle." I swallowed hard, my throat constricting. Our parents' dream home, where I had spent holidays feeling like a visitor rather than family, now belonged to Vanessa. Of course it did. Eleanor continued, her voice unchanging. "The parcel of land and structures designated as the Reeves property, situated in Whitefish, Montana, along with all related documents, is hereby transferred to Miss Rebecca Morgan." Eleanor paused, but no explanation followed. Only the faint scratch of her fountain pen filled the room as she signed off on the reading. I felt James shift in his chair beside me, his posture stiffening. "A cabin," His voice held a note I had never heard before, something between amusement and contempt. In Montana, Vanessa tilted her head, her voice sweet but edged with steel. Honestly, this suits you better, Becca. Rustic, reclusive, a little rough around the edges. I think it's perfect. Thank you, I murmured reflexively, the words falling from my mouth like broken glass. Eleanor slid a worn wooden box across the table toward me. It was beautiful in an antique way, with inlaid wood forming a pattern of mountains and trees. A small brass lock secured its contents. Your grandfather Theodore Reeves' property, she explained. Inside, you'll find the key land deed and some personal effects your mother wanted you to have. I stared at the box, tracing my fingers over the worn wood. Theodore Reeves, my mother's father, had been a quiet, intense man who moved from Montana to Chicago when I was still a child. We had spent summers visiting his cabin before that, but those memories had faded to watercolor impressions, pine trees, a wooden porch, the scent of smoke and forest. We stood in the hallway afterward under fluorescent lights that made everyone look pallid and tired. James checked his gold watch impatiently. We need to talk, he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Not here. Back at my apartment, James paced like a caged animal. The wooden box sat on my kitchen counter, still locked and mysterious. This changes everything, he said, finally removing his tie with sharp, frustrated movements. It's just a cabin, I said, confusion clouding my thoughts. I don't understand why you're so upset. It's not just about the cabin, Rebecca. He spat out my name like it had suddenly become distasteful. It's about what this represents. Your sister gets a mansion worth nearly $1 million, and you get what? A rotting shack in the middle of nowhere. This is what your parents thought of you. His words struck like physical blows. My grandfather left that cabin to my mother. It has sentimental value. Sentimental value doesn't pay the bills, James snapped. We had plans, Rebecca. A future that required a certain financial foundation. I thought when your parents passed, there would be at least something substantial to help us move forward. The realization dawned slowly, sickeningly. You were counting on my inheritance. James ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair. Don't act naive. Of course I was. We both were. Your graphic design business is barely staying afloat. My investments need capital. This was supposed to be our turning point. I can't believe you're saying this to me right now, I whispered, my voice trembling. My parents just died. And they've made their feelings perfectly clear, James said coldly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the engagement ring I had removed for the funeral and never put back on. The diamond caught the light as it clattered onto my kitchen counter. I can't build a future with someone like this. He continued, the words hanging heavy in the air between us. Someone who will always be second best, always struggling, always the afterthought in her own family. I stood frozen, watching as he straightened his cuffs, his face a mask of disappointment and finality. This isn't working. It hasn't been for a while. Your sister understands ambition. She understands what it takes to succeed. My sister. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. His late nights, unexplained absences, the way he and Vanessa sometimes exchanged looks at family gatherings. James didn't bother denying it. You've always been the lesser version of your sister. I tried, Rebecca. I really did. But I can't do this anymore. The door closed behind him with a soft, anticlimactic click. I stumbled to the bathroom, gripping the edge of the sink as my world contracted to a single point of pain. The mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized, pale, shaking, with eyes that held too much hurt. In a surge of blind rage, my fist connected with the mirror. The glass spider webbed a perfect metaphor for my life. Blood trickled from my knuckles onto the white porcelain sink, the pain sharp and clarifying. I slid to the bathroom floor, my back against the cold tile wall, and finally allowed myself to cry. Not just for my parents, but for years of feeling invisible, of trying to earn love that should have been freely given, of believing I was always falling short. Hours later, exhausted and empty, I returned to the wooden box. The small brass key required gentle persuasion before the lock yielded with a soft click. Inside, I found an old iron key, yellowed documents, and an envelope with my name written in my mother's elegant handwriting. The cabin key was heavy and rough, its head engraved with the letter R. The deed papers showed the property name Reeves Ridge, Whitefish, Montana. According to the documents, it encompassed not just a cabin, but 40 acres of forested land. With trembling fingers, I opened my mother's letter. The paper was thick and expensive, the kind she used for important correspondence. My dear Rebecca, if you are reading this, it means your father and I are gone. I know you have always felt overlooked, but please know this was never our intention. Your grandfather Theodore saw in you what we sometimes fail to see, a quiet strength that doesn't need to announce itself to be powerful. He once told me, "The things the world dismisses often contain the greatest treasures. The cabin is not what it seems, and neither are you. You will understand why it had to be you. With love, Mom." I read the letter 3 times, trying to extract meaning from between the lines. What did she mean the cabin was not what it seemed, and why me when Vanessa had always been the favored child? Sleep eluded me again that night. I sat cross-legged on my bed, researching Whitefish, Montana on my laptop. The town looked picturesque, a tourist destination near Glacier National Park, with mountains and lakes that seemed impossibly blue in the photographs. According to property records, Reeves Ridge was about 20 minutes outside town, accessible only by a private road. My phone buzzed with notifications. An email from my biggest potential client. "We've decided to go in another direction." A text from Vanessa. "Can you believe Mom and Dad left you that old cabin? At least you can go camping now." An Instagram notification showing Vanessa at a champagne brunch, the caption reading, "New beginnings," with the Lake Forest house visible in the background. Morning brought clarity. Chicago held nothing for me now. No family, no fiancé, no thriving business. The startup I had poured my heart into was failing. The apartment I could barely afford felt like a cage. The city itself, once full of promise, now seemed to mock my failures. I opened my banking app, wincing at the balance. Enough for one-way plane ticket to Montana, and perhaps a month or two of basic expenses. After that, I would need to find work or sell the cabin. With methodical precision, I began closing accounts, canceling services, and packing the few possessions I wanted to keep. My entire life fit into 2 suitcases and a carry-on bag. The rest I donated or left behind. As I checked out of my apartment building, the manager handed me an envelope that had been delivered that morning. Inside was a business card for White Pine Development Company and a handwritten note. "Interested in purchasing your Montana property? Call for a competitive offer. We're already in discussions with your sister about adjacent land opportunities." The card troubled me. How did they know about the cabin already? And what did Vanessa have to do with any of this? At the airport, waiting to board my flight to Kalispell, my phone rang with Vanessa's ringtone. I let it go to voicemail. A text followed immediately. "I heard you're actually going to that dump. Call me before you make any rash decisions. James and I might have an opportunity for you." I turned off my phone and boarded the plane, watching Chicago shrink beneath me as we ascended into clouds. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than grief and humiliation. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The plane touched down in Kalispell under a vast Montana sky that made Chicago's vaunted architecture seem small and insignificant. I rented a modest sedan, programmed the GPS coordinates from the deed, and began the drive to Whitefish. The town itself was charming, wooden storefronts, mountain views in every direction, and a sense of space I had never experienced in the city. I stopped at a local outfitter store to purchase supplies, aware that the cabin likely had no electricity or running water after years of abandonment. Heading up to Reeves Ridge, the store clerk, a woman in her 50s with weathered skin and kind eyes, studied me as I loaded a cart with lanterns, batteries, and non-perishable food. "How did you know?" I asked, startled. She smiled. "Small town, news travels. Plus you've got that city look about you, and Theodore Reeves's granddaughter coming to claim his property is the most interesting thing to happen here this month." "Did you know my grandfather?" "Everyone knew Theodore," she said, her expression softening. "Brilliant man. Kept to himself mostly, but always helped when the town needed it. There are stories about him, you know, about why he bought all that land up there." "What kind of stories?" She leaned closer. "They say he found something up there, something valuable, but he never told anyone what it was." She handed me a card with a name and number. Daniel Harrison. Call him before you head up to the cabin. The road gets tricky, especially if you're not used to mountain driving. He used to be a forest firefighter, now does guide work. He can help you settle in safely. I thanked her and finished my shopping, adding warm clothes, boots, and emergency supplies to my purchases. As I loaded the car, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street, its windows tinted. The hair on the back of my neck prickled with unease, but when I looked again, the vehicle was pulling away. Daniel Harrison answered on the second ring, his voice deep and matter-of-fact. When I explained who I was and where I was going, he agreed to meet me at a local cafe in 20 minutes. The man who arrived was not what I expected. In his mid-30s, Daniel had the lean, muscular build of someone who spent his life outdoors, but his eyes held an intelligence that belied any stereotypes about mountain men. His dark beard was neatly trimmed, and he wore a flannel shirt and worn jeans with casual confidence. "Rebecca Morgan," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Theodore's granddaughter. I've been wondering if anyone from your family would ever come back to claim that place." Over coffee, I explained my situation. The inheritance, my limited knowledge of the property, my impulsive decision to come see it. "That area is getting attention lately," Daniel said, his expression guarded. "White Pine Development has been buying up land all around there, planning some kind of luxury resort. They've been particularly interested in your grandfather's property." "They contacted me already," I admitted. "How would they even know I inherited it? The will was just read yesterday." Daniel shrugged. "Money has a way of finding information. Your grandfather turned them down multiple times when they approached him. They've been waiting for years for another opportunity." "Why would they want an old cabin in the woods so badly?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Daniel studied me with sudden intensity. "Your grandfather wasn't just some hermit in the woods, Rebecca. He was a geologist, one of the best, and he chose that land very specifically." The conversation shifted to practical matters after that. Daniel agreed to lead me up to the cabin as my rental car would struggle with the mountain road. We arranged to meet in an hour, giving me time to grab food from the local grocery store. As I paid for my groceries, I caught sight of a familiar figure through the store window. James, standing on the sidewalk across the street, speaking with a man in an expensive suit. I ducked behind a display, my heart pounding. What was he doing in Whitefish? There was no possible innocent explanation. By the time I emerged cautiously from the store, James was gone. I hurried to meet Daniel, glancing repeatedly over my shoulder. We transferred my supplies to Daniel's rugged truck, and he drove us out of town, the paved road eventually giving way to gravel, and then to a rough dirt track that wound up into dense forest. The trees grew thicker as we ascended, pine and fir closing in around us. The air smelled of resin and earth. "Not many people come up here," Daniel commented. "Your grandfather valued his privacy. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away." The isolation should have frightened me, but instead I felt something unexpected, a sense of rightness, as if I were approaching a place I belonged. The road curved sharply around a massive boulder, and suddenly the forest opened to reveal a small clearing. And there it was, the cabin. 2 stories of weathered logs, a sagging porch, broken windows covered with plywood in places. The roof had partially collapsed on one side, and vines had begun to reclaim the structure, creeping up the walls like slow-moving fingers. "Home, sweet home," Daniel said, his tone gentle, perhaps sensing my shock. I stepped out of the truck, my boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The cabin looked worse than I had imagined, abandoned, forgotten, like I had often felt in my family. "What happened to it?" I asked, approaching slowly. "Time. Weather. Nobody's lived here since your grandfather moved to Chicago years ago. Animals have probably made themselves at home." As we neared the porch, I noticed claw marks raking across the front door. Bear, most likely. The steps creaked ominously under my weight. Daniel produced a crowbar from his truck and carefully pried open the door, which had swollen in its frame. The smell hit me first. Mildew, animal droppings, the musty odor of abandonment. Dust motes danced in the sunlight that streamed through broken windows and holes in the roof. What furniture remained was covered in debris. A collapsed armchair, a dining table with one broken leg, shelves that had pulled away from the walls and spilled their contents onto the floor. It's not as bad as it looks, Daniel said, though his tone belied his optimism. The structure is solid. These old cabins were built to last. I stepped further inside my eyes, adjusting to the dimness. Family photos hung crooked on the walls, their glass shattered, the images faded. I recognized my mother as a young woman standing beside Theodore on the porch of this very cabin. They were smiling, her arm around his waist, his hand on her shoulder. They looked happy, connected in a way I had never witnessed between them in my lifetime. I can help you clean up, Daniel offered. Get the basic necessities working. There's a generator out back that might still run. The well should be good. Your grandfather dug it deep. I nodded, unable to form words. The enormity of what I had done, leaving Chicago for this, threatened to overwhelm me. Why don't we unload your supplies? He continued kindly. I'll get the generator going if I can. You can decide if you want to stay or head back to town for the night. As Daniel worked on the generator, I began the process of reclaiming one corner of the main room, sweeping away debris, wiping down surfaces, setting up my sleeping bag on a relatively clean patch of floor. Each stroke of the broom felt like an act of defiance against my parents' dismissal, against James's betrayal, against Vanessa's smug superiority. By sunset, we had made modest progress. The generator hummed to life, providing enough electricity for basic lighting. Daniel had fixed the most critical broken window, checked the chimney for nests, and started a small fire in the wood stove. The warmth pushed back against the mountain chill that descended with the darkness. I'll come back tomorrow, he promised as he prepared to leave. Bring more supplies. For tonight, keep the fire going and the doors locked. There are bears in these woods and they get curious about human food. I thanked him, suddenly terrified at the prospect of being alone in this dilapidated structure. But pride kept me from asking to return to town. This was my property now, perhaps the only thing I truly owned in the world. I would not abandon it on the first night. After Daniel left the forest, sounds intensified. The rustle of wind through the pines, the occasional crack of a branch, the distant call of an owl. I sat close to the wood stove, the dancing flames casting long shadows across the walls. On the mantelpiece, partially hidden by fallen debris, I spotted a leather-bound book. I carefully extracted it. A journal, its pages yellowed and stained, many entries rendered illegible by water damage. The handwriting was cramped, but precise, unmistakably my grandfather's. I opened to a random page, straining to read in the dim light. October 15th, 1985. The samples confirm my suspicions. What I found here goes beyond anything in the published literature. I've secured the necessary permits under the guise of timber assessment, but caution is paramount. There are always eyes watching valuable land. Catherine visited today. I wish I could tell her everything, but the fewer who know, the safer we all remain. The entry sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the mountain air. What had my grandfather found on this land? What had been so valuable and potentially dangerous that he kept it secret even from his own daughter? I read on, piecing together fragments from legible passages, but many pages were too damaged to decipher. References to core samples, unprecedented concentrations, and sustainable extraction methods appeared repeatedly alongside increasingly paranoid concerns about corporate interests watching the property. As fatigue overcame me, I curled up in my sleeping bag, the journal clutched to my chest. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by strange dreams of digging in dark earth, of voices calling from deep within the mountain of my mother, standing at the edge of the forest trying to tell me something I couldn't quite hear. A sharp sound jolted me awake. Moonlight streamed through the broken windows, casting blue-white squares across the dusty floor. The fire had died to embers, leaving the cabin cold and shadowed. The sound came again, a deliberate creaking on the porch steps. Someone was outside. My heart hammered against my ribs as I reached for my phone. No service. Of course. I grabbed the heavy flashlight I had placed beside my sleeping bag and stood, moving silently toward the window beside the door. Through a crack in the plywood covering the broken pane, I could make out a tall figure moving across the porch. The beam of a flashlight swept across the cabin's exterior, pausing at the windows, the door lock. "I know someone's in there," a male voice called. "I saw the smoke from the chimney. I just want to talk." I remained silent, terror freezing my voice. The flashlight beam found the crack in the plywood, and I shrank back hoping the darkness concealed me. My name is Scott Jenkins. I represent White Pine Development. I understand you've recently inherited this property. How could he possibly know I was here already? I had only arrived hours ago. We've been trying to acquire this land for some time, he continued when I didn't respond. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer right now, enough to set you up comfortably back in Chicago. Something in his tone, the confidence, the presumption, sparked anger that momentarily overcame my fear. Please leave, I called through the door. It's the middle of the night. This is private property. A pause. Miss Morgan, I presume Rebecca. I apologize for the unconventional hour, but I happened to be in the area and noticed signs of occupancy. This is a dangerous place for a city woman alone. Bears, mountain lions. The structure itself isn't exactly up to code. The implied threat wasn't subtle. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, wondering if it would make an effective weapon. I'm not alone, I lied, and I'm not interested in selling. Please leave or I'll call the Forest Service. Another bluff. I had no way to call anyone. Jenkins chuckled a sound that raised the hair on my arms. I understand you've had a difficult time recently. Your parents passing, the situation with your fiancé, your financial challenges. We know all about it, Rebecca. We can make this easy for you. The realization that he had been investigating me, had perhaps been watching me since before I left Chicago, sent ice through my veins. Leave now, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Or I start shooting. A long silence followed, then the sound of footsteps moving away from the cabin. Think about it, Rebecca. People like you don't last long up here. I'll be in touch. I watched through the crack as Jenkins descended the porch steps and disappeared into the darkness of the forest. Only when the sound of an engine starting and fading into the distance confirmed his departure did I release the breath I'd been holding. Sleep was impossible after that. I rebuilt the fire and sat with my back against the wall, the flashlight in one hand, a kitchen knife in the other, waiting for dawn. The first light of morning found me exhausted but resolute. The encounter with Jenkins had crystallized something within me, a determination I hadn't known I possessed. This land was mine, and someone wanted it badly enough to track me here to threaten me, which meant it was worth fighting for. As the sun rose fully above the mountains, casting golden light through the trees, I stood on the porch surveying what I had inherited. Beyond the clearing, the forest stretched in all directions, dense and mysterious. The air was cleaner than any I had breathed in Chicago, the silence profound in a way that soothed rather than unnerved. For the first time since receiving the news of my parents' death, I felt something like purpose stirring within me. Whatever my grandfather had valued about this place, whatever secrets it held, I would discover them. Not for my parents who had overlooked me, not for Vanessa who had betrayed me, not for James who had abandoned me, for myself, and for the grandfather who had somehow known I would need this place one day. I turned back to the cabin, seeing beyond its current state to what it could become, my home, my sanctuary, my new beginning. All right, Theodore, I whispered to the mountain air. Show me what you found here. The morning light streamed through broken windows, illuminating swirling dust motes and golden beams. I had survived my first night at Reeves Ridge, though survived felt like the operative word. My muscles ached from sleeping on the hard floor, and the encounter with Scott Jenkins had left me with a persistent sense of unease. I stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, surveying what was now mine. In daylight, the property revealed both its flaws and potential. The cabin itself was in worse condition than I'd initially thought. Portions of the roof had completely given way, allowing weather to damage the interior. But the setting was breathtaking. Towering pines surrounded the clearing, and in the distance, mountain peaks rose against a sky so intensely blue it seemed unreal after years of Chicago's hazy horizons. The sound of an approaching vehicle pulled me from my thoughts. Daniel's truck appeared around the bend, loaded with supplies. His expression was grim as he parked and stepped out. "You had a visitor last night," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. I nodded. "Scott Jenkins, you know him. Everyone around here knows White Pine." Daniel began unloading lumber from his truck. "They've been buying up parcels all around this area for their resort project. Your grandfather's land is the missing piece in their puzzle." How did they know I was here already? Daniel shrugged. Small town, or they've been watching. Either way, Jenkins showing up in the middle of the night isn't normal business practice. Are you okay? Rattled but fine. He tried to intimidate me with how much he knows about my life. I helped Daniel carry supplies to the porch. He mentioned my parents, my ex-fiancé, my financial situation, things he shouldn't know. They play hardball, Daniel said, his voice hardening. Your grandfather dealt with them for years. They started friendly, then got increasingly aggressive with their offers. What makes this land so valuable to them? It's beautiful, but there must be other parcels they could develop. Daniel paused, studying me carefully. Your grandfather was a geologist. Did you know that? I knew he worked with rocks, but we weren't close after he moved to Chicago. He wasn't just any geologist. He specialized in rare earth mineral deposits, found several significant sites throughout his career. Daniel gestured to the surrounding forest. This whole ridge has unusual geological features. Theodore spent years mapping it, taking samples. The journal I'd found suddenly made more sense. So White Pine wants the land for mining. Their public story is luxury ecotourism, cabins, hiking trails, zip lines. But I've always wondered if they know something about what's under the ground here. Daniel handed me a hammer. Ready to start rebuilding. We spent the day making the cabin more habitable, patching the worst roof leaks, replacing broken windows, clearing debris from the interior. As we worked, I told Daniel about finding my grandfather's journal, about the cryptic entries referencing valuable discoveries. That sounds like Theodore, he said, nailing a new board into place. He was careful, private. If he found something significant, he wouldn't announce it to the world. He'd document it, secure the legal rights, and develop a plan for sustainable extraction. By mid-afternoon, we had made substantial progress. The cabin was still far from comfortable, but at least it no longer felt like it might collapse around me. Daniel helped me set up a proper camping stove and showed me how to use the hand pump for the well. The water's clean, he assured me. Your grandfather had it tested regularly. For bathing, you can heat water on the stove for now. We'll work on proper plumbing later if you decide to stay. I'm staying, I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. At least until I figure out what's going on here. Daniel nodded, a small smile touching his lips. Good. This place has been empty too long. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, Daniel prepared to leave. Lock up tight tonight. I don't think Jenkins will come back so soon, but it's better to be cautious. I'll return tomorrow morning. Alone again, I continued exploring the cabin more thoroughly. The main floor consisted of a living area with the wood stove, a rudimentary kitchen, and what had once been my grandfather's study. Upstairs held two small bedrooms, both in varying states of disrepair. In the study, I found bookshelves filled with volumes on geology, mining, engineering, and environmental conservation. Many were annotated in my grandfather's precise handwriting. Maps of the region covered one wall with markings and notes that meant nothing to me. I was searching for more journals, anything that might explain what Theodore had discovered here. As daylight faded, I lit the lanterns and continued my exploration. The floor of the study was covered with a thick hand-woven rug in faded geometric patterns. As I pulled it back to check the condition of the floorboards beneath, I noticed something odd. One plank in the center was darker than the others, with the grain running perpendicular to the surrounding wood. I knelt, running my fingers along the edges of the anomalous board. It was secured differently too, with old hand-forged nails, rather than the machine-cut ones used elsewhere. When I tapped it with my knuckles, the sound rang hollow. My heart raced as I retrieved a pry bar from the tools Daniel had left. Carefully, I wedged it under the edge of the board and applied gentle pressure. With a groan of rusty nails, the plank lifted, revealing a small metal box embedded in the floor joists. The box was made of steel, weathered but intact with a simple latch. Inside, I found a folded map of the property, far more detailed than the one on the deed, showing topographical features, and marked with a series of coordinates. Beneath the map lay a small leather pouch and a folded paper with a sequence of numbers and letters that appeared to be some kind of code. I emptied the pouch into my palm. 3 small rocks tumbled out, unremarkable at first glance, dull gray with faint bluish streaks. But when I held them to the light, they revealed an inner luminescence, catching the lantern's glow and reflecting it in mesmerizing patterns. I was still studying the stones when a sound outside froze me in place, the distinctive crunch of footsteps on gravel. Quickly, I returned the stones to the pouch, shoved everything back in the box, and replaced the floorboard. I had just pulled the rug back into position when a sharp knock sounded on the door. "Rebecca, it's Sarah from the outfitter store." A woman's voice, nervous and urgent. I approached cautiously, flashlight in hand. Through the window, I could see the middle-aged woman who had helped me shop yesterday, her expression tense in the beam of my light. "I'm sorry to come up here so late," she said when I cracked the door, "but I saw some men in town asking about you, showing your picture. Not locals, they mentioned White Pine, but something felt wrong. I thought you should know." "What kind of men?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. "Corporate types, expensive suits that don't belong in Whitefish. One of them mentioned your sister's name, said they were business associates trying to reach you about a family matter." Vanessa. Of course she would be involved somehow. "Thank you for the warning." Sarah nodded, glancing nervously into the darkness surrounding the cabin. "Be careful, Rebecca. People have been talking about Theodore's land for years. All kinds of rumors about what he found up here." After she left, I double-checked every lock and window. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually claimed me. My dreams were filled with glowing stones and faceless men in suits, searching through endless forests. I woke to the sound of Daniel's truck in the morning. He had brought more supplies and, more importantly, news. "Jenkins and his colleagues have been asking all over town about you." He confirmed, helping me prepare breakfast on the camping stove. "And there's a black SUV with Illinois plates parked at the Mountain Lodge. Checked in yesterday under the name Mitchell." "James," I said, the coffee in my stomach turning sour. "My ex-fiancé. He must be working with White Pine somehow." I showed Daniel what I'd found under the floorboard. His eyes widened when he saw the stones. "I've seen these before," he said quietly. "Your grandfather showed me similar samples years ago. They're rare earth elements, the kind used in everything from smartphones to electric vehicles to military technology. Valuable, incredibly, and getting more valuable every year as technology advances. The U.S. imports most of its supply from China. A domestic source of this quality would be worth billions." The magnitude of what Theodore might have discovered here began to sink in. "Is that legal? Can I just mine my own property?" "It's complicated. You own the surface rights automatically, but mineral rights are another matter. We'd need to check what's recorded on your deed." Daniel studied the map intently. "These markings show multiple potential deposit sites across your property. Your grandfather was thorough. And the code? Not sure. Could be coordinates, could be a formula of some kind." Theodore was cautious about documenting his discoveries. We spent the morning securing the cabin further, reinforcing doors and windows against unwanted visitors. Daniel taught me basic safety protocols for living in bear country and showed me how to operate the emergency radio he'd brought. "No cell service up here, but this will reach the ranger station if you have trouble." He hesitated. "Rebecca, I don't want to alarm you, but I think you should know something else about your grandfather." "What is it?" "About 15 years ago, there was a dispute between Theodore and Philip Jenkins, Scott's father. They had been colleagues once, working for the same geological survey company. The story goes that Philip used Theodore's research without permission, claimed a significant discovery as his own. It made Philip's career, but Theodore never forgave him. That's why White Pine is so interested in this land," I realized. "Jenkins knows exactly what my grandfather found here." Daniel nodded grimly. "And they've been waiting for years for their chance to get it." After Daniel left, I returned to the study, determined to decode my grandfather's findings. The sequence from the hidden box seemed to match markings on the detailed map, potentially indicating specific locations on the property. I spent hours cross-referencing the code with books from Theodore's library, trying different geological classification systems, geographical coordinates, even simple substitution ciphers. By late afternoon, my eyes burned from the effort and frustration gnawed at me. Taking a break, I stepped outside for fresh air. The forest welcomed me with the scent of pine and earth. I followed a narrow trail that led from behind the cabin into the woods, hoping it might clear my mind. The path wound through dense trees before gradually ascending along a rocky ridge. After 15 minutes of hiking, the trail opened to a stunning vista. The entire valley spread below with snow-capped mountains in the distance. A flat boulder provided a natural seat, and I settled there, breathing in the view. Something about this place felt significant. I pulled out the map I'd brought along and checked my position. This ridge corresponded to one of the marked locations in Theodore's code. I scanned the ground around me with new interest, looking for anything unusual. At first, nothing stood out, just rocks, soil-scattered pine needles. But as the sun shifted position, casting different shadows across the ridge, I noticed an unusual rock formation, partially hidden by underbrush. Several large stones had been arranged in a pattern that seemed too deliberate to be natural. I cleared away the vegetation, revealing what appeared to be a small stone cairn. When I carefully removed the top stone, I found a metal container wedged inside. The watertight case contained a small notebook preserved despite years of exposure to the elements. The handwriting was unmistakably my grandfather's, but this journal was different from the one I'd found in the cabin. The entries were precise scientific, recordings of mineral compositions, extraction potential, sustainability considerations. One passage caught my attention. Site 3 confirms initial findings: concentrated deposits at 30 to 45 feet depth, extending approximately 2.7 miles along the northeastern ridge. Conservative estimates indicate commercial viability for 35 plus years, using limited impact extraction methods. The cave system provides natural access points, reducing environmental disruption. Cave system. I scanned the horizon looking for anything that might indicate such a feature. The terrain was rugged with numerous rock outcroppings and cliffs. Any of them could potentially conceal a cave entrance. The sound of a snapping branch behind me sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. I whirled around to see two men in hiking gear emerging from the trail. Their clothing looked expensive and barely used, not typical hikers. "Miss Morgan," the taller one called. "Scott Jenkins sent us to check on you. Dangerous area for a woman alone." Every instinct screamed danger. I stuffed the notebook into my jacket pocket and backed toward the ridge's edge. "I'm fine. This is private property." The men exchanged glances. "We have some papers for you to review. Development proposals. Mr. Jenkins thought you might be more receptive after having time to see the challenges of maintaining this land." "Any proposals can go through my lawyer," I said, though I had no lawyer yet. "Please leave." They advanced slowly, no longer bothering with pretense. "Let's not make this difficult. Mr. Jenkins is prepared to be very generous, but his patience isn't unlimited." I glanced behind me. The ridge dropped steeply, but a narrow game trail descended along its face. Without another word, I turned and fled, scrambling down the precarious path as shouts erupted behind me. The descent was treacherous, loose rocks skittering under my boots, branches whipping at my face. I could hear the men following their heavier frames, causing small avalanches of stone. My only advantage was my lighter weight and desperate speed. The trail wound through a series of switchbacks before disappearing into dense forest. I pushed through undergrowth, grateful for the sturdy boots I'd purchased. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter as the men struggled with the difficult terrain. I ran until my lungs burned, changing direction frequently, using the afternoon sun to maintain a general heading toward the cabin. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, I stopped to catch my breath, listening intently. The forest had resumed its normal sounds. No crashing footsteps, no voices. For the moment, I seemed to have evaded them. Orienting myself with the map and the position of the sun, I began making my way back to the cabin by a circuitous route. Dusk was falling by the time I finally spotted the clearing through the trees. I approached cautiously, watching for any sign that the men might have beaten me there. The cabin appeared undisturbed, but I didn't trust appearances anymore. I circled to the back, entering through a window Daniel had repaired, rather than using the more obvious front door. Inside, I moved silently, checking each room with my heart hammering against my ribs. Empty. Safe for now. I barricaded the doors and windows, then turned my attention to the notebook I'd recovered from the cairn. By lantern light, I pored over Theodore's detailed notes. The more I read, the more I understood what had brought White Pine to my door with such determination. My grandfather had discovered not just any rare earth deposits, but what he described as potentially the most significant domestic source in North America. His notes detailed extensive testing, even preliminary extraction experiments conducted secretly over several years. Most importantly, Theodore had documented a natural cave system that provided access to the deposits without extensive surface mining, an environmentalist's dream, allowing extraction with minimal environmental impact. The final pages contain something even more valuable: patent applications for specialized extraction methods Theodore had developed specifically for this site. These patents, if approved and still valid, would be worth a fortune. No wonder White Pine had been pursuing this property so aggressively. I was still reading when the sound of an engine approached the cabin. I doused the lantern, immediately moving to the window with my grandfather's old hunting rifle. Unloaded, but the men outside wouldn't know that. Through the gathering darkness, I recognized Daniel's truck with profound relief. "Rebecca," he called, approaching cautiously. "It's me. Are you okay?" I let him in quickly, securing the door behind him. Two men followed me on the ridge trail, White Pines people. Daniel's expression hardened as I told him about the encounter and showed him the notebook I'd recovered. "This confirms everything," he said after reading several pages. Theodore found a major deposit and developed a proprietary method to extract it sustainably. With these patents, the owner controls not just the minerals, but the only environmentally acceptable way to access them. White Pine knows all this, and they've been waiting for Theodore to die, hoping whoever inherited wouldn't understand the value. Daniel looked at me with new respect. "They didn't count on you coming here discovering the truth." "I need to find the cave entrance," I said. "The notebook mentions it as the key access point." "Not tonight," Daniel said firmly. "Those men are still out there, and navigating these woods after dark is dangerous even without human threats." He insisted on staying sleeping on the floor near the door with his own rifle close at hand. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. My mind raced with the implications of what I'd learned and the dangers that surrounded me. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with dark caves glittering with luminous stones and shadowy figures pursuing me through endless forest. Morning brought clear skies and a new determination. Over breakfast, Daniel and I pored over the maps, trying to identify the cave location from Theodore's cryptic notes. "These symbols here," Daniel pointed to markings along a contour line. "They could indicate karst topography, limestone formations where caves typically develop." "That's about a mile northeast of here," I noted, comparing the detailed map with the larger topographical chart. "We could reach it in an hour or so of hiking." "We should be prepared for those men to return," Daniel warned. "And Jenkins won't give up easily, especially now that they know you're actively investigating the property." "I need to secure my legal position," I said. "If these patents are as valuable as we think, I need a lawyer who understands mineral rights. I know someone in Kalispell who specializes in resource law, Rachel Chen. She's fought against development companies before and won." Daniel wrote down her contact information. "But first, let's find that cave. Seeing is believing, and we need to know exactly what we're dealing with." We set out after securing the cabin, taking a roundabout route to avoid potential watchers. Daniel moved through the forest with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime in these woods, pointing out tracks and signs I would have missed entirely. "Bear passed through here yesterday," he murmured, indicating massive paw prints in soft earth. "We should make some noise as we hike. They usually avoid humans if they hear us coming." The terrain grew increasingly rugged as we approached the area marked on the map. Limestone outcroppings jutted from the forest floor, and the pine trees gave way to more diverse vegetation around a small stream that cut through the landscape. "Perfect conditions for cave formation," Daniel explained. "Water dissolves the limestone over thousands of years, creating underground passages." We searched for nearly 2 hours, examining every rock face and crevice in the area. The cave entrance, when we finally found it, was so well concealed that we nearly missed it entirely. A narrow opening behind a fallen tree, partially obscured by thick undergrowth. "Your grandfather was clever," Daniel said, clearing vines from the entrance. "You'd never find this unless you knew exactly where to look." The opening was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Daniel produced headlamps from his pack, handing one to me. "Stay close. Cave systems can be disorienting, and this one likely hasn't been visited in years." I nodded, fighting back a wave of claustrophobia as we entered the narrow passage. The temperature dropped immediately, the air turning cool and damp against my skin. The beam of my headlamp created dancing shadows on rough stone walls as we moved deeper into the mountain. The passage widened gradually, until we emerged into a chamber so vast that our lights couldn't reach the ceiling. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, the sound echoing eerily around us. Stalactites hung like stone icicles formed by centuries of mineral-laden water. Theodore's journal mentioned markers. I said, my voice sounding strange in the cavernous space. We moved carefully through the chamber, our lights revealing multiple passages leading deeper into the earth. On a rock wall near one such passage, I spotted what we were looking for, a small symbol carved into the stone matching one from the notebook. This way, I said, heart racing with excitement and apprehension. The marked passage descended gradually, requiring us to climb over rock formations and wade through shallow underground streams. After about 20 minutes of difficult progress, the tunnel opened into another chamber smaller than the first, but with a remarkable feature: veins of unusual minerals embedded in the walls glittering in our headlamp beams with the same luminescence as the sample stones. My God, Daniel breathed. I've never seen a concentration like this. These are dysprosium, neodymium, possibly cerium, some of the most valuable rare earth elements, and they're just exposed here. I ran my fingers along the glittering vein. The notebook said there are multiple chambers with similar deposits throughout the system. This is worth billions, Rebecca, Daniel said quietly. And that's just what we can see. The geological survey data in your grandfather's notes suggests the deposit extends for miles under your property. The enormity of what Theodore had left me began to sink in. This wasn't just land or a broken-down cabin. It was a legacy of incalculable value and responsibility. How do I protect this? I whispered more to myself than to Daniel. White Pine will never stop coming after it. First, we document everything, Daniel said practically. Then we talked to Rachel Chen about securing your mineral rights and reviving Theodore's patents. With legal protection in place, you can decide how to proceed. Develop it yourself with environmentally sound methods, partner with a responsible company, even create a research reserve. We spent another hour exploring and photographing the cave system, finding 2 more chambers with similar mineral veins. Theodore had mapped it all meticulously, noting the most concentrated deposits and potential extraction points. His vision for sustainable development was clear in his notes. Minimal surface disruption, controlled access through the natural cave system processing methods that would leave the surrounding forest and watershed intact. As we emerged from the cave into late afternoon sunlight, I felt transformed by what I'd seen. The broken cabin, the threats from White Pine, even my family's betrayal. All seemed manageable now that I understood what I was fighting for. We should head back before dark, Daniel suggested, checking his watch. And tomorrow, I think it's time to visit Rachel Chen. We had just started down the trail when a sound stopped us cold. Voices, multiple people coming from the direction of the cabin. White Pine's people, Daniel whispered, pulling me behind a large tree. They must have been watching the property, waiting for us to leave. We crept closer, staying concealed in the underbrush. From our vantage point, we could see 4 men searching the cabin, systematically emptying drawers, pulling books from shelves, lifting floorboards. Looking for Theodore's research, I whispered. The patents, the maps. We need to get to town, Daniel murmured. My truck is parked behind the cabin. They'll see us if we try for it. So we hike out, I decided. We can reach the main road before dark if we hurry. We retreated silently, taking a game trail that led away from both the cave and the cabin. The descent was challenging, steep in places with loose rocks that threatened to announce our presence with every step. But Daniel knew these woods intimately, guiding us along less obvious paths that would be difficult to follow. As dusk settled over the forest, we reached the main road that connected Whitefish to the outlying properties. We had walked perhaps half a mile toward town when headlights appeared behind us, a vehicle moving slowly along the rural road. Into the trees, Daniel hissed, pulling me off the road. We crouched in the underbrush as the vehicle approached, a black SUV with tinted windows moving at a crawl, clearly searching. It passed our hiding place and continued down the road, but Daniel kept us concealed. Another one might be following, he explained. Let's wait. Sure enough, a second vehicle appeared minutes later, a silver sedan I recognized with a jolt of anger and fear. James's car. My ex-fiancé, I whispered to Daniel. He must be working with White Pine. The sedan passed, and we waited several more minutes before venturing back onto the road. We walked in tense silence, alert for any sound of returning vehicles. After about 3 miles, lights appeared ahead, the outskirts of Whitefish. "We'll go to Margaret's place," Daniel decided. "The town librarian I told you about. She was friends with your grandfather. We can trust her." Margaret White lived in a small bungalow on a quiet street near the library. Despite the late hour, she welcomed us without question when Daniel explained the situation. She was older than I expected, perhaps 70, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of my grandfather. Theodore always said someone would come for his discovery eventually. She said, serving us hot tea at her kitchen table. He prepared for it in his way, all those coded notebooks and hidden caches of information. "Did he tell you what he found?" I asked. "Not specifics, just that it was significant enough to change the economics of rare earth production in North America, and valuable enough that certain interests would stop at nothing to control it." Margaret studied me thoughtfully. "He also said that when the time came, his granddaughter would understand what to do with it." "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I only just learned this place existed." "Yet here you are," Margaret said simply. "Not your sister. You. Theodore knew what he was doing when he arranged for you to inherit the property." Daniel explained our plan to consult with Rachel Chen about securing the mineral rights and patents. Margaret nodded approval. "Rachel is excellent. She helped Theodore file some of his initial patent applications. I'll call her first thing in the morning." As Margaret prepared a guest room for me, Daniel stepped outside to make a call to the Forest Service about the men trespassing at the cabin. When he returned, his expression was grim. "They've already left. No sign of forced entry or major damage according to the ranger who checked, but they took some papers and maps from the study." I felt sick. "What did they find?" "Not everything," Margaret said confidently. "Theodore was too clever to keep all his research in one place. That's why he created the trail of clues leading to different caches of information. No single theft would give away the whole picture. Still, the violation of my cabin, my home, left me shaken. These people had invaded my personal space, rifled through my grandfather's belongings, stolen pieces of his life's work. The intrusion made the threat feel more immediate, more personal. "What do they want from me?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "Why not just make a legitimate business offer?" "Because legitimate business would mean sharing the profits," Daniel said. "White Pine doesn't want partners. They want total control of what could be the most valuable mineral discovery in decades." "And there's the personal element," Margaret added. "Philip Jenkins and Theodore had a bitter falling out years ago. Philip built his company on research he stole from your grandfather. This is about more than money. It's about legacy, about who gets credit for changing the industry." I thought of Vanessa and James apparently working with White Pine against me. The pattern of betrayal was becoming familiar, almost expected. But this time I wouldn't retreat into hurt and self-doubt. This time I had something worth fighting for. "I need to know everything about my grandfather's research," I said with new determination. "Everything about these patents, the extraction methods, the legal status of the mineral rights. If White Pine wants a fight, they'll get one." Margaret smiled approval, warming her eyes. "Now you sound like Theodore." That night, sleeping in Margaret's guest room, I dreamed of my grandfather. Not as the distant figure I'd barely known, but as a man of passion and vision working alone in his mountain cabin, believing he could change the world. In the dream, he looked at me with eyes that seemed to see straight into my soul and said simply, "Now you know why it had to be you." I woke with tears on my cheeks and a clarity I hadn't felt since before my parents' death. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same quiet determination that had guided Theodore Reeves through his life's work. "I understand now," I whispered to the pre-dawn darkness. "And I won't let you down." Morning light filtered through lace curtains in Margaret's guest room, waking me gently. For a moment, disorientation clouded my mind. The unfamiliar softness of a real bed after nights on the cabin floor. The absence of forest sounds, the lingering echo of my dream about Theodore. Then reality rushed back. White Pine's invasion of my home, the rare earth minerals hidden beneath my property, the uncertain battle ahead. I found Margaret in her kitchen, already dressed and making calls. She covered the phone with her hand when I entered. "Rachel Chen can see us at 9, she whispered. "Get some breakfast. Daniel will be here soon to drive us to Kalispell." By 8:30, we were in Daniel's truck heading toward the larger city. I sat sandwiched between him and Margaret, clutching a folder containing the cave photographs, Theodore's notebook, and the patent documentation we'd recovered. "Rachel is one of the best resource attorneys in Montana," Margaret explained. "She's fought White Pine before and won. If anyone can help secure your position, it's her." Rachel Chen's office occupied the top floor of a modest building in downtown Kalispell. The woman who greeted us radiated competence, mid-40s, dressed in a tailored suit with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She listened without interruption as I explained everything that had happened since inheriting the cabin. "Show me what you have," she said when I finished. I spread the materials across her desk. The deed, Theodore's notebooks, the cave photographs, the mineral samples. Rachel examined everything methodically, occasionally making notes. "Your grandfather was thorough," she said finally. "These patent applications for the extraction methods are particularly valuable. They were approved 15 years ago and remain valid for another 5 years. As for the mineral rights," she tapped the deed thoughtfully. "This is where it gets interesting. In Montana, mineral rights can be severed from surface rights, but in this case, your grandfather specifically maintained unified rights. You own everything from the surface to the center of the earth beneath your 40 acres. So legally I control the rare earth deposits," I said, hope rising. "Yes, but that won't stop White Pine from trying to force your hand." Rachel leaned forward. "Scott Jenkins is his father's son, ruthless, manipulative, and accustomed to getting his way. They'll try legal pressure, economic pressure, even personal pressure. They already are. My ex-fiancé is working with them somehow." Rachel nodded grimly. "Not surprising. They recruit allies close to their targets. It's a standard tactic." "What's my best course of action?" I asked. "We need to establish clear legal protection immediately. I'll file for an injunction against White Pine prohibiting them from accessing your property or harassing you. Then we'll register formal notice of your intention to develop the mineral resources using the patented methods. That puts everyone on notice that you're aware of the value and actively protecting your rights." "What about the break-in at the cabin?" "We'll file a police report, but without clear evidence of who entered it may not lead to immediate consequences. However, it establishes a pattern if White Pine continues their aggressive tactics." Daniel, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "They won't stop at legal maneuvers. Rebecca needs practical protection too." "Agreed," Rachel said. "I suggest you not stay at the cabin alone until this is resolved, and I'd recommend bringing in professional security for the property itself." As we discussed options, Rachel's assistant interrupted with an urgent message. "Ms. Chen, there's a Vanessa Morgan in the lobby insisting on speaking with you. She says she's the client's sister." I stiffened. "Vanessa is here. How would she even know where I am?" "Small towns," Margaret said darkly. "News travels." Rachel looked to me. "Do you want to see her?" After a moment's consideration, I nodded. Let's hear what she has to say. When Vanessa entered the office, she appeared momentarily taken aback by the assembled group. She recovered quickly her designer outfit and perfect makeup, creating a jarring contrast with our practical outdoor clothing. "Rebecca," she said with forced warmth, "I've been so worried. You disappeared from Chicago without a word. What are you doing here, Vanessa?" I kept my voice level, refusing to be drawn into her performance of sisterly concern. "I'm here to help you, of course." She glanced at Rachel, clearly recognizing a lawyer's office. "Though it seems you've already found assistance." "Cut the act. I know you're working with White Pine, with James." Vanessa's expression hardened. "Fine, we can skip the pleasantries. You're in over your head, Rebecca. You always have been. White Pine is prepared to offer $5 million for the property. Far more than that broken-down cabin is worth. Take the money and go back to Chicago. And if I refuse, don't be stubborn. You have no idea what you're dealing with. This is bigger than your little inheritance grievance." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," I said, nodding toward the mineral samples on Rachel's desk. "The question is, how long have you known about the rare earth deposits?" "Did Mom and Dad know?" Vanessa's momentary surprise confirmed my suspicion. You think finding a few pretty rocks makes you some kind of mining expert? This isn't a game, Rebecca. There are serious players involved, including your boyfriend, my ex-fiancé. At least Vanessa had the decency to look uncomfortable. James and I, that's not relevant to this discussion. It's completely relevant. You betrayed me, and now you're working with a company trying to steal what's rightfully mine. Did you ever wonder why Grandpa Theodore chose to leave the cabin to me instead of you or Mom? Because it was worthless, Vanessa snapped. Or so we thought. Clearly, the old man was more calculating than anyone realized. Rachel spoke up, her tone professionally cool. Ms. Morgan, I'm representing your sister regarding her Montana property rights. If White Pine Development has a legitimate interest in purchasing the property, they should submit a formal offer through proper channels. Harassment and trespassing will not be tolerated. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. This isn't just about business. Ask Rebecca about our parents' involvement with White Pine. Ask her why Theodore cut ties with his own daughter over this land. What are you talking about? I demanded. You think you've discovered some grand conspiracy? You don't know half the story. Vanessa gathered her designer purse, preparing to leave. $5 million, Rebecca. The offer expires in 48 hours. After that, White Pine will explore other options. After she left, I turned to the others. What did she mean about our parents' involvement? Margaret sighed heavily. There's something you should know, Rebecca. Your mother, Catherine, sided with her husband against Theodore in a dispute years ago. Thomas Morgan was an architect who designed several White Pine properties. He had financial ties to Philip Jenkins. My father worked with White Pine. The revelation staggered me. More than that, when Theodore discovered the rare earth deposits and began developing his sustainable extraction method, he approached Thomas for investment in the processing facility he wanted to build. Instead, Thomas took the information to Philip Jenkins, expecting a partnership. Jenkins cut Thomas out, tried to force Theodore to sell the land directly to White Pine. That's why there was distance between Mom and Grandpa. The pieces clicked into place, and why Dad never wanted to talk about him. Theodore never forgave them for the betrayal, Margaret confirmed. He altered his will to ensure the property would pass directly to you upon Catherine's death, bypassing your parents entirely. But why me? Why not Vanessa? Theodore saw something in you that reminded him of himself, a quiet determination, an eye for value others missed. He told me once that you were the only one who truly appreciated his stories about the land when you visited as a child. The weight of Theodore's trust settled on my shoulders. He had seen in me something my own parents had missed, had entrusted me with his life's most significant discovery, despite years of estrangement from the family. Vanessa's threat about other options concerns me, Rachel said, pulling us back to the immediate situation. White Pine has a reputation for creating problems when they can't buy what they want. Mysterious environmental violations, suddenly discovered liens against properties, even manufactured criminal charges against landowners. So what do we do now? I asked. We file the injunction and property notifications immediately. Then we develop a strategy for either defending your rights long-term or negotiating from a position of strength. But $5 million is insultingly low for what you have. The deposits alone are worth billions. Daniel, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. There's another option. Theodore always talked about creating a research foundation, developing the resources in an environmentally responsible way, while advancing the science of sustainable extraction. That would require substantial startup capital, Rachel pointed out. Perhaps, I said slowly. But what if we approached investors other than White Pine competitors, who'd value Theodore's patents and extraction methods? Rachel looked thoughtful. That could work. With the right partners and Theodore's patents, you could maintain controlling interest while accessing the necessary capital. It would be a fitting legacy. By afternoon, Rachel had filed the injunction and property notifications. She'd also arranged for a security company to monitor the cabin and surrounding property. We agreed I would stay in Whitefish rather than returning to the isolated cabin immediately. I'll need a few days to prepare a comprehensive development proposal, Rachel explained. In the meantime, keep a low profile and avoid any contact with White Pine representatives. As we left her office, Daniel suggested we stop for a late lunch at a cafe before returning to Whitefish. The restaurant was quiet, the lunch rush over, giving us privacy to continue our discussion. I still can't believe my parents were involved with Jenkins, I said, picking at my food. All those years of feeling like I didn't measure up, and they were the ones who betrayed Theodore. People make complicated choices, Margaret said gently. Your father probably thought he was making a smart business move, not betraying family. And my mother chose her husband over her father. The parallel to my own situation with James wasn't lost on me. I almost made the same mistake. Daniel reached across the table, briefly touching my hand. But you didn't. You chose to come here to discover the truth for yourself. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor, Scott Jenkins himself, impeccably dressed in a suit that seemed out of place in the casual Montana cafe. Ms. Morgan, he said, sliding uninvited into the empty chair at our table. I hoped we might have a chance to speak privately. There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Jenkins, I replied coldly. Any communication should go through my attorney. Always so formal. He smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. We're practically family given the history between our fathers. I just learned about that history. It doesn't incline me to trust you. Ancient water under very old bridges, Jenkins dismissed. I'm here to improve the offer my associates conveyed through your sister. $10 million, Rebecca. Think of what you could do with that kind of money. The property isn't for sale. Jenkins's smile tightened. Everyone has a price. What's yours? 15 million, 20, name it. Mr. Jenkins, Daniel interjected. Ms. Morgan has made her position clear. Jenkins gave Daniel a dismissive glance before returning his attention to me. Your grandfather was stubborn too. It didn't serve him well in the end. He died without ever seeing his discovery reach its potential. All those years of work wasted. His work wasn't wasted, I countered, Sid. He protected that land and those resources from exploitation, from people like you. Exploitation? Jenkins laughed. We're talking about economic development, jobs, technological advancement. The materials under your property are essential for everything from smartphones to electric vehicles to national defense systems, which is precisely why they should be developed responsibly, not stripped out as quickly and cheaply as possible to maximize short-term profit. Jenkins's facade of friendly negotiations slipped. You sound just like him, the same self-righteous idealism, the same naivete about how the real world works. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't meant as one. Jenkins stood straightening his jacket. 20 million final offer. After that, we explore alternatives. And believe me, Rebecca, you don't want us to explore alternatives. After he left, Margaret shook her head. That man is the spitting image of his father. Same arrogance, same entitlement. What did he mean by alternatives? I asked, unnerved by the thinly veiled threat. Nothing good, Daniel replied grimly. White pine has been known to create problems for landowners who won't sell. Mysterious fires, environmental violations, personal harassment. We need to get back to Rachel, Margaret decided. Jenkins showing up like this, making threats. She needs to know. We paid quickly and headed for the door, only to find our path blocked by James. My former fiancé looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot as he met my gaze. Rebecca, can we talk privately? Anything you have to say can be said in front of my friends. James glanced at Daniel and Margaret before continuing reluctantly. Look, this has gotten out of hand. I came to Montana to help smooth things over, not to participate in threats or property invasions. What Jenkins is planning, it's not right. It's not. What is he planning? I demanded. James lowered his voice. He's not just after the rare earth elements, the patents Theodore developed. They're the real prize. White Pine has been trying to develop similar extraction methods for years without success. With those patents, they could dominate the entire North American rare earth market. So they sent you to try a softer approach, my ex-fiancé who cheated on me with my sister. James had the grace to look ashamed. I made a terrible mistake, Rebecca. I got caught up in status and ambition and lost sight of what mattered. Save it. I moved to push past him. I'm not interested in your apologies or your warnings. Rebecca, please. Jenkins is dangerous when he doesn't get what he wants. He's talking about manufacturing environmental violations, creating evidence that you're mismanaging protected resources. He has contacts in the regulatory agencies. I paused, studying James's face for any sign of deception. Why are you telling me this now? Because despite everything, I don't want to see you hurt. He reached into his pocket and produced a flash drive. This contains internal White Pine documents, emails, meeting notes, strategy memos about the acquisition of your property. There's enough here to prove they've been planning underhanded tactics. I hesitated before taking it. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't, he admitted. But you can verify the documents independently. They're authentic. Daniel stepped forward protectively. Is that all? James nodded. Tell your lawyer to look for connections between White Pine and Montana Environmental Regulatory Board members, particularly Thomas Schultz and Raymond Vickers. They're in Jenkins's pocket. After James departed, we returned immediately to Rachel's office, sharing both Jenkins's threats and James's warning. Rachel examined the flash drive contents carefully. These appear legitimate, she confirmed after an hour of review, and extremely damaging to White Pine. Evidence of corporate espionage, regulatory corruption, even plans to manufacture environmental violations against you. Can we use this? I asked. Absolutely. It strengthens our injunction and gives us leverage for potential criminal charges if they proceed with their threats. Rachel looked up from her computer. But it also escalates the situation significantly. White Pine won't take this exposure lightly. What do you recommend? A two-pronged approach. First, we use these documents as an insurance policy. Notify White Pine that the evidence has been secured with multiple attorneys and will be released if anything happens to you or your property. Second, we accelerate our development plan to establish your active management of the resources before they can create problems. I want to honor Theodore's vision, I said firmly. Sustainable extraction, minimal environmental impact, scientific advancement. Rachel nodded. Then let's create the Reeves Foundation for Sustainable Resource Development. We can approach universities and research institutions as partners rather than profit-driven corporations. Over the next several days, we worked intensively to establish the foundation. Rachel drafted the legal framework while I developed the mission statement and operational guidelines based on Theodore's notes. Daniel connected us with environmental scientists and mining engineers who had respected my grandfather's work. Throughout this period, I stayed at Margaret's home in Whitefish, avoiding the cabin until security measures were in place. But I was growing increasingly determined to reclaim my property, not just the land and its valuable minerals, but the home Theodore had created there. A week after our confrontation with Jenkins, Rachel called with unexpected news. The injunction against White Pine was granted, but that's not the interesting part, she said. Jenkins has suddenly backed off. No appeal, no counterfiling, nothing. It's as if they've completely abandoned their pursuit of your property. That doesn't make sense, I said, immediately suspicious. Why would they give up after being so aggressive? I'm not sure, but I'm looking into it. In the meantime, the security team reports no unusual activity at the cabin. It might be safe for you to return if you want to. I did want to. Despite its dilapidated condition, the cabin had begun to feel like home. The first place that was truly mine, connected to the one family member who had valued me for myself. Daniel insisted on accompanying me, driving us up the mountain road with careful attention to our surroundings. The cabin appeared untouched since the break-in, peaceful in the afternoon sunlight. I'll check the interior, Daniel said, drawing a small handgun from his jacket. Wait here, he returned minutes later. All clear. No signs of disturbance since the security team installed the cameras. We spent the afternoon continuing the cleanup and repair work we'd begun before the confrontation with White Pine. Daniel replaced more broken windows, while I sorted through Theodore's books and papers, organizing what remained after the theft. As evening approached, Daniel reluctantly prepared to leave. I don't like the idea of you staying alone here tonight, especially with White Pine's sudden retreat. It feels wrong. The security team is monitoring the property, I reminded him. And I need to do this, reclaim my home on my terms. After extracting my promise to keep the satellite phone nearby and call it the first sign of trouble, Daniel departed. The cabin felt different now, no longer alien and intimidating, but familiar, almost welcoming. I prepared a simple dinner on the camping stove, and sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. For the first time since my parents' death, since James's betrayal, since the reading of the will, I felt a sense of peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I had found something here worth fighting for. Not just valuable minerals, but a connection to my own history, a purpose that resonated with my deepest values. I was preparing for bed when the satellite phone rang. Margaret's voice came through, tense and urgent. "Rebecca, turn on your emergency radio, Channel 7, now." I complied and immediately heard the local emergency broadcast. "Attention residents of Whitefish and surrounding areas. Forest fire reported on Reeves Ridge moving northeast. Mandatory evacuation in effect for all properties within 5 miles of the ridge. Emergency personnel en route." "A fire? But there hasn't been lightning, and it's not even fire season," I said, stepping outside to scan the horizon. In the distance, an ominous orange glow illuminated the night sky. "It's not natural," Margaret said grimly. "Daniel just called. He's on his way back to get you. The fire started near your property line, multiple ignition points. He says it has white pine written all over it." My blood ran cold. "The cave system. They're trying to burn me out to gain access. Or destroy evidence of the deposits if they can't have them," Margaret agreed. "Get whatever you can carry of Theodore's research and be ready when Daniel arrives. This is their alternative approach." I moved quickly, gathering Theodore's notebooks, the mineral samples, and the most critical documentation into a backpack. The smell of smoke was growing stronger, carried on a wind that had begun to gust ominously. Daniel's truck roared up the drive 20 minutes later, headlights cutting through the thickening smoke. He leapt out, face streaked with ash. "The fire's moving fast," he shouted over the growing wind. "Forest Service is responding, but it's already reached the north corner of your property. We need to go now." As we threw my belongings into the truck, a new sound rose above the wind, the mechanical growl of heavy equipment moving through the forest. "What is that?" I asked, straining to see through the smoke. Daniel's expression darkened. "Bulldozers. Creating a firebreak supposedly. Want to bet they're from White Pine. They're using the fire as cover to access the cave system," I realized. "We have to stop them." "We have to get you to safety first," Daniel insisted, guiding me toward the passenger door. "The fire is real and dangerous regardless of how it started." A blinding flash of headlights cut through the smoke as another vehicle pulled into the clearing. Rachel Chen's SUV. She emerged wearing jeans and a heavy jacket, a far cry from her usual professional attire. "I brought reinforcements," she announced, as 2 more vehicles appeared behind her. "State environmental protection officers and a court representative with an emergency injunction preventing any fire remediation by private entities on your land. We anticipated Jenkins might try something like this." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. As firefighters battled the advancing flames, Rachel's legal team confronted the White Pine bulldozer operators, presenting the emergency court orders. State officials documented the unnatural fire pattern, collecting evidence of accelerants and deliberate ignition points. By dawn, the fire was contained, having burned nearly 100 acres, but spared the cabin and the critical cave system. In the harsh morning light, Scott Jenkins arrived, his expensive clothes incongruous against the ash-covered landscape. "This is a natural disaster," he insisted to the assembled officials. White Pine was simply providing emergency assistance for fire containment. "With bulldozers that coincidentally headed straight for the cave system containing the rare earth deposits," Rachel challenged. "And I suppose the multiple ignition points with chemical accelerants were also natural." "You have no proof of White Pine's involvement in any alleged arson," Jenkins countered, though his usual confidence seemed shaken by the unexpected opposition. A Forest Service investigator approached holding an evidence bag. "Actually, we found this near one of the ignition sites." He held up a White Pine Company ID card belonging to one of Jenkins's associates. As Jenkins struggled to maintain his composure, another vehicle arrived, James looking disheveled and grim. "It's over, Scott," he said without preamble. "I've already spoken with the FBI about White Pine's activities, the corporate espionage, the regulatory bribes, the planned environmental sabotage. They're executing search warrants at the company offices right now." Jenkins's face contorted with rage. "You treacherous little—" "Save it," James interrupted Ed. "I've provided federal authorities with everything. Emails, financial records, meeting recordings. including your instructions regarding tonight's fire. In the days that followed, the full extent of White Pine's corrupt practices emerged. The company's stock plummeted as investigations widened to include activities in multiple states. Philip Jenkins resigned as CEO, and Scott was placed on indefinite leave pending criminal charges. 3 weeks later, I stood on the porch of my now-repaired cabin, watching a group of university researchers carefully documenting the cave system and its unique mineral deposits. The Reeves Foundation for Sustainable Resource Development was officially established with partnerships with 3 major research institutions and a mandate to develop Theodore's extraction methods for the benefit of both technological advancement and environmental protection. Rachel had negotiated agreements ensuring that I maintained controlling interest in both the resources and the patents while providing the necessary capital for development. The estimated value of the combined assets exceeded $80 million, but more importantly, Theodore's vision for responsible stewardship would be realized. Daniel approached carrying 2 mugs of coffee. The research team is excited about the Northwestern Cave section. Apparently, the mineral concentration there is unlike anything they've documented elsewhere. Theodore knew what he had discovered, I said, accepting the mug gratefully. He just wanted it used properly. He would be proud of what you're doing. We stood in comfortable silence watching the researchers work. The property showed few signs of the fire now, new growth already emerging from the blackened earth in a testament to nature's resilience. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rachel. Vanessa requesting meeting, says it's important, your call. I considered for a moment before replying, tomorrow afternoon at the cabin. Daniel raised an eyebrow when I told him. Are you sure? Yes. This is my home now, my territory. If Vanessa wants to talk, she can come to me. The next day, Vanessa's sleek car looked comically out of place on the rugged mountain road. She emerged cautiously, designer boots, wholly unsuited to the terrain expression guarded as she approached the porch where I waited. This is not what I expected, she admitted, glancing around at the repaired cabin and the research equipment visible near the cave entrance. What did you expect? I don't know. Something more primitive. You've made it quite habitable. I didn't bother explaining that the cabin had become more than habitable. It had become a home I loved, with each repair and improvement a connection to Theodore's legacy. Why did you want to meet Vanessa? She hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. I've been doing some thinking since White Pine's collapse, about choices, about values, and I realized I've spent my life pursuing things that look impressive but don't actually matter. The house in Lake Forest feels empty. The career I was so proud of seems shallow. What about James? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Gone, back to Chicago. Our relationship was never about genuine connection, just mutual ambition and status. She met my eyes directly for perhaps the first time. I owe you an apology, Rebecca. Many apologies, actually. For James, for working with White Pine, for a lifetime of treating you as less than. Why the change of heart? Seeing what you've built here. Standing up to Jenkins when everyone else caved to his pressure. Creating something meaningful instead of just chasing money. She gestured toward the researchers. You've honored Theodore's legacy in a way none of the rest of us could have. I studied my sister, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown to expect from her. Instead, I saw something new. Vulnerability. Perhaps even genuine remorse. What do you want from me, Vanessa? Nothing. Or maybe just a chance to get to know you as you are, not as I've always assumed you to be. I considered her request, remembering Theodore's journal entries about forgiveness, about the human capacity for change. I'm not ready to trust you, I said finally. But I'm willing to try for a relationship with boundaries. Real ones this time. Relief washed over her face. That's more than I deserve. Probably, I agreed, but with less bitterness than I might have felt weeks earlier. Would you like to see what we're doing here? What Theodore discovered. The tour of the property and explanation of the Foundation's work seemed to genuinely impress Vanessa. By the time she prepared to leave, something had shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. As spring turned to summer, the cabin transformed. Solar panels provided reliable electricity. A new well pump delivered running water. The porch was rebuilt with comfortable chairs positioned to capture the spectacular mountain views. Inside, Theodore's study became the heart of the home. His books and maps now properly displayed his vision carried forward through my work with the foundation. Daniel became a constant presence, his expertise invaluable to the research team, his companionship increasingly important to me. Our relationship evolved naturally built on shared values and mutual respect, rather than the superficial attraction that had characterized my time with James. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Daniel asked the question that had been hovering between us for weeks. Will you stay in Montana even after the foundation is fully established? I looked out at the mountains, at the forest recovering from the fire, with new growth at the cabin that had become more than an inheritance. It had become a purpose. Yes, I said simply. This is home now. His hand found mine warm and calloused from honest work. I was hoping you'd say that. Later that night, after Daniel had gone, I sat alone in Theodore's study, now mine, reading through one of his earliest journals. A passage caught my attention, written decades ago, but speaking directly to my present. The true value of discovery lies not in what we find beneath the earth, but in what we choose to do with that knowledge. Wealth can corrupt or empower. Resources can be exploited or stewarded. The choice determines not just the legacy we leave, but the people we become in making it. I closed the journal filled with gratitude for the grandfather who had seen in me what my parents never could. Not just the potential for success, but the character to use that success wisely. The broken cabin he had left me contained more than rare earth minerals worth millions. It contained the most valuable inheritance of all, the chance to discover my own worth measured not by others' expectations, but by the courage to stand firm in my convictions. Outside, the Montana night unfurled in a tapestry of stars brighter and more numerous than I had ever seen in Chicago. Somewhere in that vastness, I like to think Theodore was watching, satisfied that his life's most important discovery had found its rightful guardian. I had come to Reeves Ridge broken and betrayed, seeking only escape. I had found instead a treasure beyond price, purpose, belonging, and the quiet strength that comes from finally recognizing your own value. I understand now, I whispered to the starlit sky, why it had to be me.